So, we've considered music and a country's name. What about the world of commerce? There have been no end of high-profile naming battles to secure corporate names and trademarks, reflecting on the sometimes extraordinarily high price that companies will place on defending their name identity. The founder and the chair of the UK branding consultancy BrandCap is called Rita Clifton.
Apple computers versus Apple Core. That's core as in CORPS rather than CORE. There was a long-running dispute between those two companies going back to the 1970s where Apple computers was very much focused on producing just what it said, i.e. computers. That punch-up between Apple computers and Apple Core, took years and years of legal wrangling, suing and so on, and now there's an agreement between the two. Another example would be Rolls-Royce. To most consumers, there's a lot of confusion between Rolls-Royce motor cars and Rolls-Royce PLC, which of course is the British engineering business and in aerospace.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it, that those cases, as you say, Rolls-Royce and Apple, they kind of resolved it. They figured it out. We now have, into perpetuity, these two separate entities bearing the same name. You then have those other areas, don't you, where you have regions, for example, or a product. In a way, it seems more of an existential battle almost when you're talking about champagne or Scotch whiskey, to what extent these things have to be protected within their areas, because then you've got farmers, producers in that area saying you can only make this liquid, for example, if you're from Scotland.
One can understand why it is that people get so very protective because, again, these assets, these brand names and brands themselves as a whole are worth millions of pounds. Your brand name has got to be distinctive. It's got to be memorable. It has got to be something that is ownable, both legally and also creatively in some way.
Are there any cases when companies have changed names, have been forced to abandon names, but have survived the ordeal?
If you just think about some of the examples, Google started out as Backrub. What would that have been like? Pepsi-Cola started its life as being Brad's drink. You can change name over time. There are many others. So Datsun to Nissan, Kentucky Fried Chicken to KFC. All of Ola's or all of Yule is now all of Ole. It can be done. It quite often requires a lot of communication investment. It can cost you a lot of money to change logos, to create advertising that associates your brand with a new name. So you've got to have a really, really good reason, or frankly be compelled to do so before you decide that you're going to do it.
How much are they worth? Could you literally put a number on it in terms of as a proportion of the value of it must depend obviously from company to company, but what's the most extreme example you can think of?
Well, if you just look at the most valuable brands in the world, Apple is by most league table compilers the most valuable brand in the world. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. And indeed, if you look at Google, if you look at IBM, if you look at McDonald's, we are looking at the majority of the value of that company being down to the fact that it is called Apple or McDonald's or whatever. And if you think about some perfumes in the luxury sector, in fact, a lot of brands in the luxury sector, the vast majority of the value of that business is down to the fact that the brand is known, A, by its name, and B, of course, by its associations. If you just think about perfume in a bottle, what is it? It's a bit like a brown fizzy drink. It doesn't cost that much to produce it, but of course then to package it, to make sure that you've got the right blend, you've got the right associations. These are the very expensive parts.
Okay, let's move now a little bit beyond this trademark issue, the specifics of the name, and look at where we are nowadays. A lot of these are very historic arguments, as you've mentioned. We are now in an era, aren't we, where some would argue the brand itself, the idea of the brand, is a little bit under threat in the world of more and more online marketing. There is a limit, perhaps, in the modern age when we are now better at contrasting and comparing, that when the maker of a well-known computer or, let's say, telephone system is charging us perhaps, let's say, 20% more than a reasonably comparable competitor, and all the reviews are telling us that online, we're going to be a little bit more picky, perhaps, than we were 5 or 10 years ago.
Yes, and one of the real upsides of the digital world is that everything is visible, everything is transparent, so everything counts. And what counts there, of course, is that you have to have a product that is great quality, that lives up to whatever promises you're making about it, because if it doesn't, bad news travels extremely fast with a scale and a speed that will take your breath away. So people will vote with their feet. You've got to do the right thing all the time. And that means in terms of product, in terms of service, and also in terms of looking after your staff and environment and so on. So that's one of the upsides of the digital age, but it's also something that makes bad, lazy companies extremely nervous and sweaty.
Indeed. Brand expert Rita Clifton.